Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The dust motes danced in the single shaft of sunlight slicing through the Redemption Marshal's office. Daniel Gray sat at his desk, the wood scarred and gouged like his own weathered face. He turned the tarnished star in his calloused hand, the metal warm against his skin, a familiar weight he'd carried for 20 long years. 20 years of chasing shadows, of dealing out justice in a land where justice was often bought and sold. He was tired, bone-tired. He'd earned his peace. Soon he'd be tending his small patch of land outside of town, far from the gunfights and the crooked smiles of men like Jedediah Thompson. A shadow fell across his desk. Jedediah, Redemption's sheriff, a man whose eyes always seemed to be calculating angles. "Marshal," he drawled, the words sounding like a polite curse. "Got a situation?" Daniel sighed, placing the badge on the desk with a dull thud. "I'm off duty in a week, Jedediah. Seems like your situation should be your problem. This ain't exactly a local matter, Daniel. Came in on the stage this morning. Woman. Needs protection. Testifying against the Barlow gang in Carson City." Daniel's gaze narrowed. The Barlows were vultures, preying on the weak and leaving nothing but bones. And why can't Carson City protect their own witnesses? Jedediah shrugged, a gesture that reeked of insincerity. "They're stretched thin. Asked for our assistance. Seems this woman, a Miss Emily Porter, specifically requested you." Daniel raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Requested me? I've never met the woman." "Word travels, Daniel. You got a reputation." Jedediah's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Besides," he added, lowering his voice, "the Barlows have friends everywhere. Safer if she's escorted by someone trustworthy." The last word hung in the air, a subtle jab at Jedediah's own questionable reputation. Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering. He wanted out. He craved the quiet solitude of his farm, but the thought of a woman facing the Barlows alone all right, he conceded, the word heavy on his tongue. "I'll escort her." "Good man, Daniel, good man." Jedediah clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that felt like a brand. "She's at the Grand Saloon, waiting for you." The Grand Saloon was a cacophony of noise and smoke. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the tinny piano music assaulted Daniel as he stepped inside. He scanned the room, his eyes settling on a woman sitting alone at a table near the back. She wasn't what he expected. He'd pictured someone meek, frightened. This woman held herself with a quiet confidence, her chin lifted, her gaze steady as she surveyed the room. She had auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her simple traveling dress did little to hide the intelligence in her sharp blue eyes. He walked towards her, his spurs clicking softly on the wooden floor. "Miss Porter?" She looked up, her gaze meeting his without flinching. "Marshal Gray?" He nodded. "I'm here to escort you to Carson City." "Finally," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I was beginning to think I'd been forgotten. Sheriff Thompson informed me of your predicament." Daniel pulled up a chair. "We'll leave at dawn." "Dawn?" She raised an eyebrow. "I was hoping to leave immediately." "It's a long ride, Miss Porter. Safer to travel in daylight." "Safer for whom, Marshal?" she challenged, her eyes flashing. "I have no illusions about the dangers I face. Every hour I spend in Redemption is an hour closer to them finding me." Daniel studied her, impressed by her courage, but unwilling to be rushed. "We'll leave at dawn," he repeated, his voice firm. "In the meantime, I'll arrange for a room at the boarding house. It's the safest place in town." "With all due respect, Marshal," she said, leaning forward, "I'm not interested in safety. I'm interested in getting to Carson City and testifying against those men. The sooner we leave, the better." "Your safety is my responsibility, Miss Porter," Daniel said, his voice hardening, "and I intend to take it seriously." Emily Porter stood her ground, refusing to back down. "My safety, Marshal, is my own concern, but I appreciate the sentiment. However, I will not be kept here a moment longer than necessary. I will be ready at dawn, but if I detect any sign of delay or incompetence, I will continue the journey to Carson City with or without your assistance." Daniel's lips thinned into a grim line. He was used to dealing with outlaws and gunmen, not headstrong women who challenged his authority. "Suit yourself, Miss Porter. But don't say I didn't warn you." He stood and signaled to the bartender. "Whiskey." "Meat!" He needed a strong drink. This was going to be a long ride. The boarding house was a modest 2-story building on the edge of town. Mrs. Henderson, the owner, was a plump, matronly woman with a kind smile and eyes that missed nothing. She gave Emily a small room on the 2nd floor, overlooking the main street. "Marshal Gray said you needed a place to rest," she said, handing Emily a key. He seemed concerned. "The Marshal is a professional," Emily replied, offering a polite smile. "I'm sure his concern is purely professional." Mrs. Henderson chuckled. "Maybe. But I seen that man escort plenty of folks through redemption. He usually just drops them off and leaves. He doesn't usually linger, making sure they're comfortable." Emily didn't reply. She thanked Mrs. Henderson and closed the door. She crossed the small room and looked out the window. The street below was quiet. The only sound the distant barking of a dog. She knew they were out there, watching, waiting. The Barlows had a long reach, and she was a loose end that needed to be tied off. She unpacked her meager belongings, laying out her pistol and a small knife on the bedside table. She wasn't helpless. She'd learned a thing or two about survival in her travels. She just needed to reach Carson City. Downstairs, in the dimly lit saloon, Daniel sat nursing his whiskey. He watched Jedediah Thompson enter, his slicked-back hair gleaming under the lamplight. Jedediah slid into the chair opposite him, a smug look on his face. "So," Jedediah said, his voice low, "you got the witness. Everything going according to plan." Daniel took a long swig of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving Jedediah's. "What plan are you referring to, Sheriff?" Jedediah chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Don't play coy with me, Daniel. We both know the Barlows are willing to pay handsomely to make sure Miss Porter doesn't reach Carson City." Daniel slammed his glass on the table, the sudden noise silencing the nearby conversations. "You involved with the Barlows, Jedediah?" Jedediah held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just a businessman, Daniel. Seeing an opportunity. The Barlows offered me a considerable sum to facilitate Miss Porter's disappearance. I thought you might be interested in a cut." Daniel stared at him, his face a mask of cold fury. "You're a disgrace, Jedediah. You swore an oath to uphold the law, and you're willing to sell out a woman's life for a few dollars. Don't get self-righteous on me, Daniel," Jedediah sneered. "You're not some saint. We all got our price. And besides," he added, leaning closer, "think about it, Daniel. Retirement's expensive. A little extra cash could make all the difference." Daniel rose to his feet. his hand instinctively reaching for the butt of his gun. "Get out of my sight, Jedediah, before I do something I regret." Jedediah, seeing the anger in Daniel's eyes, backed away, his smile vanishing. All right. Just a suggestion. No need to get your feathers ruffled." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Daniel stood there for a moment, his fists clenched. He'd always known Jedediah was corrupt, but he hadn't realized the extent of his depravity. He finished his whiskey in one gulp and walked out of the saloon, the weight of his duty pressing down on him. He had to protect Emily Porter, not just from the Barlow's craft, but from the very man who was supposed to be upholding the law. This wasn't just another escort mission. This was a fight for justice, a fight for his own redemption, and he wouldn't let Jedediah Thompson, or anyone else, stand in his way. Back in her room, Emily checked her pistol one last time. The silence of the night was deceptive. She knew they were out there, circling like wolves, waiting for their chance. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared herself for the dawn. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with courage and determination. She had a story to tell, and she wouldn't be silenced. The Easterner and the Marshal dust motes swam lazily in the lone sunbeam that lanced through the gloom of the Marshal's office. Emily, arms crossed, shot Daniel a look, a rebellious spark in her eyes as bright as the gleam on Daniel's Colt Peacemaker, hanging sentinel on the wall. West, then a northward veer through the Devil's Tooth Range, Daniel announced, his tone clipped, brooking no argument. Emily's derisive snort filled the silence. "The Devil's Tooth? You aiming to get us both killed, Marshal? The Barlows practically own those mountains. Open plains are the only way faster, less chance of ambush." Daniel pivoted, his gaze like flint. "The plains are watched too, Miss Porter, and offer scant shelter. Yes, the Devil's Tooth is a gauntlet, but it also provides cover. I know those peaks, I know how to vanish within them." "Vanish from who, Marshal? Specters? Or Barlow scouts who've mapped every contour?" Emily snapped, her frustration bubbling over. "I'm the target here. Shouldn't I have a voice?" He closed the distance between them, his lined face only inches from hers. "Your voice is in choosing to cooperate, Miss Porter. My charge is delivering you to Carson City alive, and I'll do it my way." He paused, a thread of exhaustion lacing his voice. "Believe it or not, I'm reasonably adept at keeping folks breathing." Emily didn't recoil, but a flicker of uncertainty betrayed her resolve. She knew he was right, at least about needing him. "Fine," she conceded, the word clipped. "Devil's Tooth it is. But I'm not walking in blind. I need the lay of the land." Daniel inclined his head, yielding slightly. "You'll need a rifle, and the know-how to use it. There's one in the back with ammunition. Pack light, but pack smart." He indicated a battered saddlebag on the floor. "Water, jerky, bedroll, that's all you need." Emily scrutinized him, measuring. "And you, Marshal? Ready for this? Or just counting down the days to retirement?" His eyes narrowed, a spark igniting within their depths. "Retirement can wait. My sole focus is getting you to Carson City. Don't mistake my gray hair for decrepitude, Miss Porter." As Emily gathered her meager possessions, Daniel stepped outside, the sinking sun daubing the dusty street with fiery hues. He needed Maria. Her cantina was the closest thing to a sanctuary in this town, a place where secrets slithered and information poured like rotgut. Inside, Maria polished the bar, her dark eyes sharp, all-knowing. The air was thick with the reek of spices and flat beer. "Daniel," she greeted, her voice a low, resonant murmur. "What brings you here? Trouble, I surmise." "Trouble named Emily Porter," he responded, leaning against the worn wood. "We ride out in the morning." "For Carson City." Maria nodded slowly, her expression grave. "Thompson won't let you slip away quietly." "I know," Daniel said, his tone hardening. "I need to know Thompson's game." Maria's gaze darted around the cantina, confirming their privacy. "He's signaled the Barlows. They'll be waiting both on the plains and nestled amongst the Devil's Tooth. He wants her silenced, Daniel. And you silenced too." Daniel sighed, raking a hand through his thinning hair. "Figured as much? Anything else?" Maria hesitated, then reached beneath the bar, retrieving a small, exquisitely carved knife. "For the woman," she said, handing it to Daniel. "Tucked in her boot, for when all hope is lost." Back in the office, Emily wrestled with the rifle, fumbling the loading mechanism. Daniel observed her for a long moment, his face a mask. He gently took the weapon, demonstrating the proper technique with fluid grace. "Keep it close," he said, returning it. "And learn its language. Your life might depend on it." Maria drifted in, her presence radiating a quiet strength. She moved directly to Emily, ignoring Daniel. "The trail ahead is paved with danger, child," she said, her voice soft yet resolute. "You must find fortitude, not only in your limbs, but in your heart." She dipped into her apron pocket and pressed something small and rigid into Emily's hand. "Conceal this. It might be your final safeguard." Emily glanced down at the object in her palm, a diminutive, viciously sharp knife, its hilt adorned with intricate floral carvings. Her gaze met Maria's, a silent pact forged between them. "Thank you," she breathed, stowing the knife in her boot. Maria turned to Daniel, her gaze unwavering. "Protect her, Daniel. She is more than just a witness. She is a beacon of hope for the silenced." Daniel simply nodded, his jaw clenched. He understood the stakes. He knew the odds were insurmountable, but he also knew he couldn't abandon her. As the last embers of daylight dwindled, painting elongated shadows across the room, Emily met Daniel's gaze, a newfound determination etched on her face. "Let's move, Marshal," she stated, her voice clear and firm. "Let's be done with this." The shifting frontier beckoned, and with it, the redemption he was uncertain he deserved. Ambush on the road, the stagecoach jolted ahead, churning up a cloud of ochre dust that caught the sun's early rays. Redemption receded, its painted facades and simmering undercurrents fading into the immensity of the plains. Inside, the wheel's percussive rhythm and the suspension's groan formed the soundtrack, punctuated by the horse's occasional, impatient blow. Daniel, across from Emily, watched the unfurling vista, a panorama holding its breath. Emily's gaze remained fixed ahead, her hands locked together in her lap. The weight of Maria's knife felt significant against her thigh. "Try to relax, Miss Porter," Daniel rumbled. "Carson City isn't far." Her eyes flickered towards him. A spark of resistance ignited within them. "Relaxation begins when I'm sworn in, giving my testimony. Not a heartbeat sooner. A slight shift, a whisper of fabric. Don't imagine I haven't noticed your vigilance, Marshal. Anticipating trouble?" Daniel met her gaze unflinchingly. "Prudence dictates expecting the worst, Miss Porter, particularly when it's actively seeking me." A pause, his gaze hardening. "Or you." The sun ascended, scorching the plains. The air thickened, a palpable, shimmering weight. Daniel tugged at his collar. beads of perspiration already forming. A prickling sensation crawled over him, an anticipation divorced from the oppressive heat. Then, bedlam erupted. Gunfire tore through the air, ripping into the stagecoach with savage force. The horses shrieked, rearing in terror. The driver's shout became a gurgled silence. The carriage bucked wildly, slamming Daniel and Emily against its inner walls. Wood splintered, raining down like jagged confetti. "Get down!" Daniel bellowed, forcing Emily to the floor. His Colt Peacemaker emerged, its solid heft a source of grim comfort. He risked a peek. Bandana-masked figures on horseback converged, firing with careless abandon. Callahan's hired guns. "They were tipped off," Emily choked out, muffled by the floorboards. "Thompson." Later, Daniel snapped, eyes narrowed. "Stay low and silent." He fired through the shattered window, the weapon bucking in his grip. A rider cried out, tumbling from his saddle. But their numbers were overwhelming. The stagecoach shuddered to a complete stop, the horses still caught in their frantic dance. The attackers closed in, their barbaric yells echoing across the desolate expanse. They were cornered, Daniel realized with stark clarity. "Staying here is suicide," Emily stated, surprisingly composed. She reached into her dress, producing Maria's derringer. It seemed almost a toy in her grasp, yet her grip was resolute, her eyes unwavering. Daniel stared, surprised. "Where did you get that?" "Irrelevant," she replied, voice tight. "Can you reload it?" "One shot," she confirmed, checking the cylinder. "Ensure it counts." Daniel nodded, his expression grim. This was the crucible. This was where fate made its decision. He drew a breath, bracing himself. On my signal. The attackers were practically upon them, their mounts snorting and stamping the earth. One, a hulking figure with a livid scar bisecting his cheek, dismounted, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "All right, Gray," he roared. "Come out with your hands up and bring the woman." Daniel tensed, recognizing the scar. Callahan's enforcer, Rafe. Rafe reached for the door, his grin predatory. This was the opening. "Now," Daniel roared. With astonishing speed and unexpected ferocity, Emily jammed the derringer through a splintered gap and fired. The blast echoed, deafening, within the confined space. Rafe recoiled, clutching his chest, his eyes widening in disbelief. He collapsed, lifeless. The other attackers faltered, momentarily taken aback by the sudden attack. Daniel seized the advantage. He kicked the door open, flinging himself out, firing his Colt in a sweeping arc. Bullets zipped past, tearing at his coat. He dropped to one knee, using the overturned stagecoach as a shield. Emily scrambled out, crouching low. "What now?" she yelled over the cacophony. "We run," Daniel shouted back, firing again. "Towards the ridge. There's some cover." He seized her hand, dragging her forward, dodging projectiles and clambering over the rough terrain. The attackers were relentless, pursuing them at a gallop, their bullets kicking up dirt around them. Emily stumbled, nearly falling. Daniel yanked her upright, his grip unyielding. "Keep moving." They reached the ridge, collapsing behind a jumble of rocks, lungs burning. The attackers pressed on, but the boulders offered a degree of protection. "We can't hold out here," Emily rasped, her voice strained. "They'll encircle us." Daniel knew she spoke the truth. They were trapped, outnumbered, outgunned. But surrender was not an option. Not yet. He looked at Emily, her face smudged with grime and sweat, her eyes burning with a defiant flame. He perceived something new within her, a fortitude that belied her delicate exterior. She was no longer merely a witness. She was a survivor. "We'll make them bleed," he swore, his voice a low growl. "We'll make them answer for every drop of blood spilled this day." He began reloading his Colt, his movements fluid and practiced. "Brace yourself, Miss Porter. This is far from over." This shifting territory exacted a price, and on this day they would both pay it. The price of redemption, whatever it may be, would be paid. Ghost Town Refuge. The ghost town of Redemption Gulch wasn't much to look at, even in its prime, Daniel figured. Now, with the setting sun painting the skeletal remains of its buildings in hues of blood orange and bruised purple, it resembled a graveyard more than a refuge. They'd reached it just as the last light bled from the sky, pushing their weary horses into a lather. He'd chosen it for its obvious lack of inhabitants, living ones at least, and the natural cover it provided. The ambush back on the trail had been too close, too coordinated. Someone had known their route. He dismounted, his left arm throbbing where a bullet had grazed it. "Stay close," he rasped, his voice rough from dust and adrenaline. Emily, surprisingly, needed no prompting. She moved with a newfound confidence, her eyes sharp as she surveyed the deserted street. The derringer was still tucked discreetly into her sleeve, he noted. They chose the saloon, or what was left of it. The swinging doors were long gone, replaced by gaping holes, and the roof sagged precariously in places, but it offered the best visibility and defensible positions. Daniel pushed aside a rotting table, creating a makeshift barricade near the entrance. "Think they'll follow?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was crouched near a shattered window, peering out into the gathering darkness. "Callahan doesn't leave loose ends," Daniel replied grimly, checking the cylinder of his revolver. "He'll be back." He risked a glance at her. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair tangled, but her eyes held a fierce determination that surprised him. This wasn't the frightened woman he'd collected in town. "Then we wait," she said, her tone resolute. She moved away from the window, closer to him. "Let me see that arm." He hesitated, then relented, pulling up his sleeve. The graze was ugly, but not life-threatening. Just a burning reminder of his own complacency. "It's nothing." Emily ignored him, tearing a strip of cloth from her petticoat. "It needs cleaning." "I may not be a doctor, Marshal, but I know enough to stop infection." Her touch was surprisingly gentle as she dabbed at the wound with water from his canteen. "Thank you," he mumbled, feeling oddly vulnerable under her care. It had been a long time since anyone had tended to him. Silence settled between them, broken only by the creaking of the wind through the dilapidated buildings. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of dust and decay. "Why are you doing this, Marshal?" Emily asked suddenly, her eyes fixed on his. "Risking your life for me." Daniel sighed, leaning back against the crumbling wall. "It's my job, but it's more than that, isn't it?" she pressed, her voice softer now. "You could have easily left me back there. Turned a blind eye. Most men would have." He looked away, his gaze lost in the shadows. "I made a promise." To who?" He hesitated, the ghosts of the past swirling around him. "To myself," he finally said. "A long time ago. I swore I wouldn't let injustice win." He didn't elaborate, didn't want to dredge up the memories of a life spent chasing shadows, a life filled with regret. Emily seemed to sense his reluctance. She didn't push, but her gaze remained steady, unwavering. "What about you, Emily?" he asked, turning the conversation. "Why are you so determined to testify against Barlow? You know he'll stop at nothing to silence you." Her expression hardened. "He took everything from me," she said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "My family, my home, my future. He thinks he can get away with it because he's powerful, because he has the law in his pocket, but I won't let him. I owe it to my parents to see him brought to justice." He saw the pain in her eyes, the burning desire for revenge. It mirrored his own, a dark reflection of the past he tried so hard to bury. "Justice is a fickle thing, Emily," he said, his voice low. "Sometimes it comes at a terrible price." "I'm willing to pay it," she replied, her chin lifting defiantly. "Are you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. He thought of his impending retirement, the quiet life he'd envisioned, far away from the violence and corruption. But, looking at Emily, at the fire in her eyes, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when she needed him. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "I am." The night deepened, drawing a shroud of darkness over Redemption Gulch. They sat in silence, two wounded souls seeking refuge in a forgotten place, bound together by a shared sense of purpose and a growing, undeniable connection. Daniel knew this was more than just a joke now. It was a reckoning, and he was ready to face it, whatever the cost. He glanced at Emily, huddled against the cold, her face illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the broken windows. He saw not just a witness, but a woman of extraordinary strength and resilience. A woman who had the power to awaken something long dormant within him. He knew then that this last job of his might just be the most important one he'd ever taken. He pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders, a silent promise of protection, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings that were beginning to stir within him. He would keep her safe, even if it meant sacrificing everything, even if it meant facing his own demons, and finally paying the price for redemption. Whispers in the wind. The wind began as a guttural murmur, a desolate exhalation that ghosted through the skeletal ruins of Redemption Gulch. Miniature cyclones stirred in the distance, foreshadowing a menace far beyond mere weather. Daniel, wincing against the escalating gale, drew Emily closer to the decaying saloon wall. "A real screamer's brewin'," he gravelled, his voice already raspy with airborne grit. Emily, ever the keen observer, had already registered the deepening umbra of the sky, the unnerving calm before the onslaught. She offered no argument, showed no fear. Instead, she met his gaze, her eyes mirroring the unease she felt. "What now?" "We find shelter," Daniel responded, steering her toward a more or less sound corner of the saloon, a haven formed by converging walls. The saloon doors were ancient history, pilfered for kindling ages ago, leaving them vulnerable. He tightened his poncho around her slender form, offering a meager shield. The wind intensified, its cry a banshee's shriek echoing through the deserted streets. Initial volleys of sand stung their skin like 1,000 needle pricks. In mere moments, the storm unleashed its full wrath. Visibility plummeted. The air thickened with a swirling vortex of sand, a blinding, suffocating tempest. Daniel enveloped Emily in his arms, a living rampart against the assault. The wind's roar was deafening, punctuated by the sharp reports of debris colliding with the crumbling structures. "Can you hear me?" he bellowed, his voice barely cutting through the tempest's rage. Emily nodded, pressing closer, burying her face against his chest. "Now, A glacial cold seeped through their garments, a clammy chill. The temperature dove as the sun vanished and the wind howled with greater intensity. He felt her tremble, a delicate vibration that ran through her. "We need to keep warm," he stated, his voice tight. Shifting their position, he drew her into a tighter embrace, attempting to share his body heat. "Think we can light a fire?" Emily shook her head, her muffled reply barely audible. "Too risky. The wind will scatter the embers. We'll ignite the whole place." He knew she spoke the truth. Fire was a gamble they couldn't afford. They were marooned, at the mercy of the elements. Time stretched, each second feeling like an age. The unremitting assault of sand and wind exacted a toll both physical and mental. He tasted grit between his teeth, felt it in his eyes, everywhere. As the hours crept onward, the physical misery dulled into a throbbing ache. They huddled together, sharing meager warmth, their silence punctuated only by the storm's relentless bellow. He could sense her breathing, rapid and shallow initially, gradually becoming measured as exhaustion took over. He found himself studying the soft lines of her face, the delicate dusting of sand on her lashes. This forced intimacy was unnerving. He hadn't held a woman this close in years, not since he suppressed the memory, a sharp sting of regret in his gut. He concentrated on Emily, on the present, on his duty to protect her. Eventually, the trembling ceased, replaced by a heavy stillness. He felt her head rest against his shoulder, her body heavy with weariness. He shifted slightly, attempting to make her more comfortable, and she stirred in her sleep. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice slurred with sleep. "I'm here," he rumbled. She opened her eyes, her gaze unfocused. "It's dreadful." "It is," he agreed. "We'll make it through." She looked at him, her eyes scrutinizing his. "Why are you doing this?" she queried, her voice barely a breath. "Why are you risking everything for me?" He hesitated, unsure how to answer. "It's my job," he said at last, the words ringing hollow even to his own ears. She shook her head slightly. "No, it's more than that. I see it in your eyes." He looked away, avoiding her direct gaze. He had spent years constructing barriers around his heart, walls of cynicism and detachment. He didn't want her to see the flaws, the vulnerability that lay underneath. "I gave my word," he said, his voice coarse. "To your father, that's all." She didn't respond, but he could sense her gaze lingering, probing, questioning. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind's persistent howl. "What will you do when this is all over?" she inquired, abruptly changing the topic. "After I testify?" He shrugged, a barely perceptible movement. "Retire, I suppose. Find a quiet place, maybe raise some horses." It was a long-held fantasy, a vision of serenity and isolation. But now, as he spoke the words, they sounded hollow, devoid of genuine feeling. "Is that truly what you want?" she asked. "To be alone?" He hesitated again. "I don't know any more," he confessed, the words barely audible. He had lived in solitude for so long, he had nearly lost touch with the simple act of connecting, with sharing his existence with another. "What about you?" he countered, turning the inquiry back to her. "What will you do?" "I don't know either," she replied, her voice tinged with melancholy. "I never looked beyond the trial. All I desired was to see Barlow face justice." "And then?" he pressed. She sighed, a long, deliberate exhalation. "I don't know. Perhaps begin anew, somewhere far removed from all this." You could accomplish anything, he said, his voice softer now. You're strong, Emily, more than you realize. She looked at him, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. You truly think so? I know it, he affirmed, meeting her gaze squarely. You've weathered more adversity than most. You possess the resilience to forge a different path, a fulfilling one. He reached out, his hand lightly touching her cheek. Her skin was icy, but her eyes burned with a fierce warmth, harboring a tenderness that resonated deep within him. A stirring, a yearning he hadn't experienced in years, began to ignite. He wanted to shield her, not only from Barlow and his cronies, but from the world, from the anguish and tribulation he understood all too well. He retracted his hand, suddenly aware. The moment had waned, but the connection lingered, a delicate thread woven between them. The wind continued to wail, a persistent reminder of the tempest beyond, but within the confines of their shared refuge, a different storm brewed, an upheaval of emotions threatening to consume them. He regarded Emily, truly saw her, and recognized not merely a witness, but a woman of unwavering courage and fortitude, a woman who had captured his attention and awakened something dormant within him. He must protect her, not only to fulfill his promise, but for his own sake. He must ensure her safety, ensure she could grasp at a new dawn. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could discover that new dawn alongside her. Now the whispers in the wind carried a different tune, a promise of hope, of opportunity, of redemption. But redemption, he knew, demanded a price, and he was prepared to pay it. The oasis of doubt the wind's shriek hadn't lessened, yet its fury was now interwoven with the clatter of approaching hooves. Through a sliver in the boarded-up saloon window, Daniel saw them a dozen or more of Callahan's thugs, circling Redemption Gulch like carrion birds eyeing their next meal. "They're here," he muttered, his tone flat, betraying nothing. Emily, tending a meager blaze in the hearth, lifted her head, her face ashen but firm. "The plan, Daniel?" Her voice, surprisingly steady, cut through the whistling drafts. He scrubbed a hand across his stubbled jaw, his gaze roving the bleak vista. "No plan that involves becoming target practice. This tempest is our sole advantage. They won't anticipate us moving in such weather." He stomped out the fire, draping the saloon in near-total gloom. The wind howled through gaps in the walls, an unearthly choir. Outside, Callahan's voice, a gruff bellow, fought its way through the storm. "Gray, Porter, come out now. We know you're in there. Save yourselves the grief." Daniel ignored the rant. He steered Emily towards the back, muttering, "Root cellar, best chance we've got." The cellar smelled of damp earth and decay. Daniel wrestled the thick wooden door shut, its slam swallowed by the storm's din. He shoved a sturdy table against it, a meager barricade. How long will that hold? Her eyes were wide with worry. "Not long," he admitted, his expression grim. "Just buys us a bit." He drew a small water skin from his saddlebag, offering it to her. "Drink up." They waited, the distant shouts of Callahan's men a muffled soundtrack to their fear as the search party probed the ghost town. The storm persisted, a wild, chaotic symphony of gales and grit. "They'll find us," Emily whispered, her voice frail. "Maybe," Daniel countered, his gaze fixed on the cellar door. "But we won't make it easy." The sharp crack of splintering wood echoed from above. They were breaching the saloon. "Now," Daniel said, seizing his rifle. "We run." He kicked open a concealed portal at the rear of the cellar, exposing a tight, earthen tunnel. "Leads out the back. Slim odds, but it's all we have left." They crawled, the damp earth chilling their skin, and dust choking their lungs. After what felt like an age, they burst into the storm-lashed expanse, the wind ripping at their clothes like angry claws. "East!" Daniel roared above the tempest. "Towards the mountains!" They ran, stumbling through the inky black, the gale driving them forward. Pursuit, distant but distinct, urged them on. Miles blurred as the tempest clawed at their faces. Just as their reserves flagged, Daniel spied something a copse of trees, incongruously verdant against the desolate backdrop. "There!" he cried, gesturing wildly. "An oasis!" Hope, a jolt of adrenaline, surged through Emily's veins. They lurched towards the trees, their muscles screaming in protest. As they approached, the oasis revealed its secret heart. A spring of pristine water gurgling into a tranquil pool, encircled by thriving flora. A pocket of paradise, a world away from the surrounding desolation. They collapsed beside the pool, savoring the cool, life-giving water. The oasis, a break from the storm's tyranny, a haven of solitude. "Never thought such a place existed," Emily breathed, awestruck. "The desert hides its secrets well," Daniel replied, his eyes scanning the surrounding emptiness. "Most whisper death." They rested, gathering their strength. Daniel knew they couldn't linger. Callahan's dogs would sniff them out, eventually. As the storm began to abate, a glint in the sand near his saddlebag caught his eye. He retrieved it, a small, folded note. Coded. Caleb Johnson's script. He cracked the code, and the message landed like a blow. Thompson compromised. Trust no one. Sheriff Thompson, the trusted ally, the man he'd known for years, was in Barlow's pocket. The truth crashed over him in a wave of fury and betrayal. He glanced at Emily, who watched him, concern etched on her face. "What is it?" she asked softly. Daniel hesitated, reluctant to burden her with this fresh horror, but knowing he couldn't shield her. "Thompson's been bought," he stated, his voice like gravel. "He's with Barlow." Emily's face drained of color. "Who can we trust, then?" Daniel gazed across the vast, unforgiving desert. The deck was stacked against them. Alone, hunted, betrayed by those they believed in. But surrender wasn't an option. He had to shield Emily, see this through, even if it cost him everything. "Just each other," he answered, his eyes locking with hers. "Always has been." The coded message, transcribed onto a scrap of tattered parchment, burned in Daniel's mind like a brand. He traced the symbols with a calloused finger, the flickering lamplight casting dancing shadows across the oasis walls. Thompson. The name, once a beacon of trust in a sea of corruption, now felt like a poisoned dart lodged in his gut. How could the sheriff, a man he'd bled alongside, be in league with Callahan? Emily watched him from across the small fire, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. She hadn't pressed him about the message, sensing the turmoil churning within him. But her silence was a question in itself, a silent demand for truth. "It's Thompson," he finally said, the words heavy with disbelief. "The message, it mentions him by name. He's working with Callahan." Emily's expression hardened. "I knew it. There was something slick about him, too eager to help, too many questions about our route." She rose and walked to the edge of the oasis, peering into the darkness beyond the firelight. "We can't trust anyone, can we?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. He felt every one of his 50-odd years in that moment. "I thought I could trust Thompson. We go back a long way." He paused, his gaze hardening. "I need to know for sure. I need to see his face when I ask him. And if he is involved, What then, Daniel? Emily asked, turning back to face him. Will you bring him in? Arrest the sheriff of this county? Daniel met her gaze, his jaw tight. Justice is justice, Emily, no matter who wears the badge. The ride back to Redemption Gulch was a silent one, the weight of betrayal pressing down on them both. Daniel replayed every conversation he'd had with Thompson in the past few weeks, searching for any hint of deceit, any flicker of guilt. He found none. The sheriff was a master of deception. Or he was completely innocent, and Daniel was about to make a terrible mistake. The sun was setting as they rode into town, painting the dusty streets in hues of orange and purple. The saloon, still bearing the scars of the previous night's brawl, stood silent and empty. Daniel dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Stay here," he said to Emily, his voice low. "I don't want you involved in this." Emily shook her head. "I'm going with you. I need to see this for myself." Daniel didn't argue. He knew she wouldn't back down. He pushed open the door to the sheriff's office, the familiar scent of stale coffee and tobacco smoke filling his nostrils. Thompson was sitting behind his desk, his boots propped up, reading a newspaper. He looked up, a smile spreading across his face. "Daniel! Emily! Glad to see you both made it back safe. I was worried sick when I heard about the trouble at the saloon." He stood up, extending a hand. Daniel ignored the hand, his eyes fixed on Thompson's. "We need to talk, Sheriff." Thompson's smile faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Of course, Daniel. What's on your mind?" He gestured to the 2 chairs in front of his desk. "Please, sit down." Daniel remained standing. "I received a message, Sheriff. A coded message. It mentioned your name." Thompson's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained calm. "My name? What are you talking about?" Daniel pulled the parchment from his pocket and tossed it onto the desk. Thompson picked it up, examining it with a puzzled expression. "I don't understand. This is just gibberish." "It's a code, Sheriff. A code used by Callahan and his men." Daniel watched Thompson closely, searching for any sign of recognition. "The message implicates you in their operations." Thompson laughed, a forced, hollow sound. "Daniel, you can't be serious. You think I'm working with Callahan? After all these years?" He threw the parchment back onto the desk. "That's absurd." "Is it, Jedediah?" Daniel's voice was low and dangerous. "Because Callahan's men knew exactly where we were going to be. They knew we'd be at the saloon. Someone gave them that information. Someone we trusted." Thompson leaned back in his chair, his eyes hardening. "Are you accusing me, Daniel, after everything we've been through?" "I'm asking you a question, Jedediah. Are you working with Callahan?" Thompson stared at him for a long moment, his face unreadable. "Of course not, Daniel. You know me better than that." Emily stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Thompson's. "Do we, Sheriff? Do we really?" She had been silent, observing, and Daniel could see the judgment in her gaze. "You seem awfully quick to deny everything, almost rehearsed." Thompson turned to her, his expression shifting from indignation to annoyance. "And who are you to question me, Miss Porter? You're just a witness." "A witness who saw Callahan's men waiting for us," Emily countered, her voice sharp. "A witness who saw the fear in your eyes when Daniel mentioned the ambush." Thompson stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to listen to this. You're accusing me of things you can't prove." "Then prove us wrong, Sheriff," Daniel said, his voice unwavering. "Tell us everything you know about Callahan. Tell us about your relationship with him." Thompson hesitated, his eyes darting back and forth between Daniel and Emily. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. I don't know anything about Callahan. I've never met him. Daniel stepped closer, his face inches from Thompson's. That's a lie, Jedediah. I can see it in your eyes. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily watched the two men, her hand resting on the handle of the pistol hidden beneath her coat. She knew that this confrontation could turn violent at any moment. Get out of my office, Daniel, Thompson said, his voice trembling. Before I arrest you for insubordination. Daniel didn't move. I'm not leaving until I get the truth. Then you'll be staying here a long time, Thompson spat, his hand reaching for the gun on his hip. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the office. A patchy passage, the desert radiated heat, a deceptive promise shimmering above the parched earth. Daniel swiped at the perspiration beading on his forehead, the invasive grit a constant irritant. Before them lay Apache territory, a landscape scored with deep secrets and the potential for swift, brutal conflict. He cast a sideways glance at Emily. Her face was a mask of resolve mirroring his own inner steel. They were beyond Sheriff Thompson's reach, yet far from secure. Callahan's influence, he knew, was a spreading poison. Stick to the defiles, Daniel rasped, his throat tight. Fewer eyes, Emily affirmed with a nod, adjusting the rifle across her shoulders. And fewer nasty surprises. The sun hammered the landscape as they picked their way through the treacherous terrain. Razor-edged rocks punished the horses' hooves, and the air was thick with the pungent aroma of sage and baked earth. The hours bled together, the shifting shadows the only measure of time. As the sun began its plunge, painting the western horizon with strokes of crimson and violet, they made him out. He appeared sculpted from the very stone, almost invisible against the rugged backdrop. Sinewy and alert, his obsidian eyes pierced the distance, barring their route. An Apache scout. Daniel hauled back on the reins, his hand instinctively hovering near his Colt. "Hold it," he warned, his voice a low growl. The scout remained unmoved, his gaze unwavering, unsettlingly intense. His voice, when it came, was a guttural murmur. "This is Apache land. You are not welcome." "We intend no trouble," Daniel countered, striving for neutrality. "We're simply passing through." The scout's gaze narrowed, sweeping over them with undisguised suspicion. "Why?" Daniel hesitated, unwilling to reveal their desperate plight. "We ride west," he offered, aiming for simple truth. The scout remained impassive, seemingly unmoved. "West is a vast expanse. Many reasons propel journeys westward." A pause hung in the air. "You carry the stink of fear on you." Emily shifted in the saddle, a slight but telling movement. "It's been a difficult trek," she stated, her tone surprisingly steady. "We only seek safe passage onward." The scout's intense scrutiny shifted to Emily, examining her. Then he moved, circling her mount. Daniel braced, ready to intervene. Emily met his gaze head-on, unflinching. "My name is Emily," she announced, her voice ringing with clarity. "I possess some knowledge of your people. I am aware of the value you place on respect, forthrightness, and valor." The circling ceased, his expression unreadable, a mask. "What knowledge is this you speak of?" Emily dismounted, approaching him without any semblance of fear. Daniel watched, a hand never far from his weapon, ready to draw if needs must. "I know the Apache cherish gifts," Emily said, her hand disappearing into her saddlebag. She withdrew a delicately crafted basket, purchased weeks prior at a trading post a piece that had captivated her with its intricate workmanship. "This is a token, a gesture of peace." The scout's gaze remained fixed, unwavering. He neither accepted nor rejected the offering. "Further," Emily continued, her voice unwavering, "I am aware of the immense hardships your people have endured. Broken agreements, stolen grounds, and promises betrayed. I comprehend your distrust." Daniel was quietly astonished by her poise. She walked a precarious line, yet seemed to know precisely where she stepped. The scout finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Words are wind." Emily gave a curt nod. "Indeed, but deeds resonate. We will not hunt game on your lands. We will not purloin from your people. We will act with consideration towards your customs. We ask only for passage without incident." She extended the basket, her hand steady and sure. Hesitation flickered across his features. Then he reached out and took the basket. He studied it intently, his eyes searching. "What name do you carry?" Emily inquired. "Isaiah Blackwood," he responded, his voice losing its edge, softening slightly. "Isaiah?" Emily echoed, the name hanging in the air. "We would be indebted for your guidance through this area." Isaiah scanned them both, his gaze lingering a moment on Daniel's weather-beaten visage and the gun strapped to his thigh. "You were a lawman," he stated to Daniel. No inflection hinted at a question. Daniel nodded slowly in acknowledgement. "I was so." "And you are protector to the woman?" "That I am." Isaiah fell silent, taking them in. The desert wind howled, bearing with it dust and the specter of coming night. Finally he spoke. "Safe passage has a tariff," he proclaimed, his voice resolute. "You will portion your water, you will portion your sustenance, and you will answer all questions with the unvarnished truth." "Agreed," Daniel responded without pause. Emily added a nod of assent. "We agree." Isaiah's expression remained guarded, but a hint of respect showed itself. "Follow me," he instructed, turning and moving to vanish into the deepening blackness. "There exists a hidden spring near at hand. We will set camp there until morning." Daniel and Emily exchanged a quick look. They had secured a tenuous alliance, yet remained exposed. As they followed Isaiah into darkness, Daniel knew their journey was far from over. The price of redemption, he reckoned, was about to become punishingly steeper. And the demarcation between what was just and what was lawful had blurred so badly as to be rendered meaningless. The duel in the canyon ochre and rust-streaked canyon walls pressed close. A vise of stone. Isaiah's warning echoed a natural trap favored by the unscrupulous. Daniel's fingers instinctively found the worn grip of his Colt, years of use having polished the leather to a sheen. Beside him, Emily sat rigidly upright, her gaze laser-focused on the constricted path. Heat shimmered off the baked earth, conjuring phantom whirlwinds in the distance. Then, etched against the canyon's exit, he materialized. Callahan, a silhouette of menace, blocking their way. Two riders flanked him, their expressions tight with anticipation. A palpable tension, thick as the desert air, descended. Daniel hauled back on the reins. "So much for shortcuts," Emily observed, her voice remarkably steady. She didn't move towards the rifle, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, assessed their predicament with a pragmatism that simultaneously reassured and concerned Daniel. Callahan nudged his mount forward, hooves drumming against the rock face. He halted within spitting distance of the wagon, a cruel satisfaction twisting his features. Reflected in the westering sun, his badge gleamed a tarnished emblem of authority. "Gray?" Callahan drawled, the single word laced with disdain. Didn't expect you to get this far. Figured you'd be buzzard bait by now, courtesy of the Apaches. Sheriff, Daniel countered, his tone even. Didn't peg you as the type to soil your own hands. Thought you preferred to delegate the dirty work. A harsh, humorless chuckle escaped Callahan. Times are changing, Marshal. Sometimes, a man has to take care of things personally. His eyes flicked towards Emily, lingering for a moment. Especially when a certain witness proves so remarkably persistent. Emily returned his stare, unflinching. I'm not intimidated by you, Callahan. You should be, little bird. Callahan spat. You should be quaking in your boots. He returned his attention to Daniel. But this isn't about her. This is about you, Gray. You've been a burr under my saddle for too long, always nosing around, asking questions best left unasked. Just upholding the law, Sheriff, Daniel stated, his cob, grip tightening on the reins. Your lawman days are over, old-timer. Time for retirement of the permanent variety. Callahan's hand hovered near the pistol at his side. I'm feeling generous, Gray. Walk away. Leave the girl, and you can ride out of here. Enjoy whatever peace you've got left. Daniel's gaze hardened. He knew it was a lie. Callahan would never let them leave. This was a setup, a cold-blooded execution disguised as an offer. And if I decline your generous offer? Daniel inquired, already knowing the response. Callahan's lips stretched into a predatory grin. Then we settle this the way men have settled disputes for centuries. A duel. You and I. First light. Winner takes all. Emily gasped, a soft, strangled sound. Daniel, no! Don't fall for it. It's what he wants. Daniel glanced at her, his gaze a mixture of resolve and regret. She was right, but he saw no alternative. He couldn't gamble with her life. He had to confront Callahan, even if it meant his own demise. I don't fancy your chances, Sheriff, Daniel said, his voice steely. But I never back down from what needs doing. That's the spirit I was hoping for, Callahan said, his eyes gleaming with malicious anticipation. Right here, Dawn. No shenanigans. Just you and me. He indicated to his men with a flick of his wrist. Clear the stage. Give us some room to dance. The two riders urged their horses forward, nudging the wagon towards the canyon wall. They dismounted, efficiently clearing the area of obstructions. The sun continued its descent, painting the canyon floor with long, ominous shadows. Emily seized Daniel's arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. Daniel, please. There has to be another solution. We can't let him dictate the terms. There isn't, Emily, Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm. He's got us boxed in. This is the only way to buy you time, perhaps a chance to vanish. Vanish to where? She retorted, her eyes blazing with defiance. I'm not abandoning you. You must, Daniel insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. My duty is to safeguard you. If I fall, you must flee. Head due west, toward the mountains. Seek out someone trustworthy. I trust you. Emily whispered, her voice choked with emotion. And I won't forsake you. Daniel framed her face with his hands, his eyes searching hers. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Emily. You possess the resilience to weather this, even if I don't. He leaned down and touched his lips to her forehead, a brief chaste gesture heavy with unspoken affection. Callahan observed them, a sneer distorting his face. Sentimental farewells, Marshal. Save them for your tombstone. He turned his horse and rode back towards the canyon's mouth. Dawn, Gray, don't be tardy. The sun vanished below the rim, plunging the canyon into blackness. Daniel and Emily were left in silence, broken only by the whispering wind and the distant cry of a coyote. Daniel descended from the wagon and began preparations. He examined his Colt, ensuring its mechanisms were smooth and its chambers loaded. He honed his Bowie knife until it gleamed under the moonlight. He knew he faced a dangerous adversary. Callahan was a deadly gunslinger, his soul corroded by years of avarice and brutality. Yet Daniel had overcome worse. He had survived skirmishes with outlaws, battles with native warriors, and the relentless trials of the West. He had always discovered a path to victory, to defy the odds. However, this time, a feeling of foreboding settled in his bones. A weariness, a sense of resignation he couldn't dismiss. From the wagon, Emily watched him, her eyes reflecting her anguish. She understood that Daniel was putting on a brave front, but she saw the underlying fear. She knew he was willing to sacrifice himself for her safety, but she wouldn't permit it. She wouldn't allow him to throw his life away so carelessly. She climbed down from the wagon and approached him. "What are you planning to do?" she asked, her voice scarcely audible. Daniel met her gaze, a blend of love and despair within. "I'm going to do what's needed," he replied. "I'm going to safeguard you." "But what about you?" Emily questioned, tears welling up in her eyes. "What about your own life? Don't you want to survive?" Daniel smiled, a sad, nostalgic smile. "I've lived a full life, Emily. I've witnessed horrors no one should ever face. I've committed deeds I regret, but I've also done some good. I've assisted people, I've defended the defenseless, and I've consistently strived to do what's moral." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "But the truth is, I'm weary. I'm tired of battling, tired of killing, tired of seeing the evil in the world. Perhaps this is my opportunity to finally attain some tranquility." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Daniel, don't talk like that. You deserve better. You deserve to find joy." Daniel reached out and wiped away her tears, his touch tender and loving. "Perhaps I do," he replied. "And maybe, just maybe, if I can navigate this, we can discover that joy together." He inhaled deeply and looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "But first, I have a duel to win." Rose and ochre bled across the canyon walls with the rising sun. A stunning mask draped over the deadly confrontation brewing below. Dust devils pirouetted across the parched earth, echoing the unease twisting in Daniel's stomach. He faced Callahan, the air a palpable web of animosity, laced with the sharp scent of gun cleaner and impending violence. Callahan's spittle landed with a dull thud near Daniel's dusty boots. "Reckoned you'd be quaking, old-timer." Daniel's gaze remained unwavering, his hand ghosting near the well-worn grip of his Colt. "Just waiting on your play, Callahan. Wouldn't want you crying foul." His voice, a low growl, betrayed nothing of the turmoil within. Hidden behind a rock formation, Emily's heart hammered a frantic tattoo against her ribs. The sheriff's posse formed a silent cordon, an audience to the potential carnage. She scrutinized their expressions, searching for a hint of doubt, a glimmer of conscience, finding only hardened resolve. Or perhaps, she considered, simple fear. A harsh laugh scraped from Callahan's throat, shattering the morning calm. "Always were a priggish sort, Gray. Acting high and mighty, but blood's blood, ain't it?" He shifted, eyes narrowed to slits. "Let's see how virtuous you are face down in the dust." A subtle shift telegraphed his intent, a clenching jaw, a twitch of a finger. But Daniel registered it, reacted instantaneously. He drew in a seamless motion, the Colt blossoming in his hand, its report ripping through the silence. Callahan was quick, his reflexes honed by years of bending and breaking the law. His own shot answered almost simultaneously, the bullet buzzing past Daniel's ear, a painful reminder of mortality. They circled, a macabre waltz, the only sounds the scuff of boots on the stony ground, and the labored breaths of two men locked in a deadly struggle. Each round was delivered with precision, each movement measured, a desperate game of survival unfolding under the pitiless sun. A familiar ache throbbed in Daniel's shoulder, a dull echo of past battles and unhealed wounds. Fatigue gnawed at him, his aging body protesting the exertion. He needed an opening, a decisive advantage. That's when Emily intervened. She refused to stand idly by while Daniel offered himself as a sacrifice. Bolstered by adrenaline, she surged to her feet, her voice shattering the tense quiet of the canyon. "Callahan! You've betrayed your oath." The sheriff momentarily lost his focus, his eyes darting toward her, surprise flickering across his features. It was the opportunity Daniel craved. He surged forward, his Colt roaring a final time. This time his aim was true and deadly. Callahan gasped, his weapon clattering to the ground as a slug ripped through his gun hand. Clutching the wound, blood blossoming between his fingers, his face twisted in a mask of anguish and rage. "Damn you, Gray! You'll rue this day." Daniel stood above him, weapon steady. His breath came in ragged gasps, sweat gluing his hair to his brow. He felt the crushing weight of his years, the burden of countless decisions. He could end it all here. A swift shot, a final act. No more threats, no more complications. Retribution would be immediate and absolute. But looking into Callahan's eyes, he saw not merely hatred, but stark terror. And within that terror, he recognized a reflection of the man he once was. A man consumed by rage, driven by a thirst for vengeance. He lowered his Colt. "It's done, Callahan," Daniel stated, his voice rough but resolute. "Time for justice to run its course." Callahan glared up at him, disbelief warring with pain. "Justice? From you? You're a relic, Gray. That's not how things work anymore." Daniel ignored the taunt, turning to the surrounding deputies. "Arrest him. He is wanted for obstruction, conspiracy, and attempted murder." The deputies hesitated, their allegiance split between their corrupt leader and the legendary marshal standing before them. But Daniel's gaze held firm, his authority undeniable. One by one, they yielded, lowering their guns. Emily hurried to Daniel's side, her eyes shining with relief and admiration. "You could have killed him," she whispered. "Why didn't you?" Daniel holstered his Colt, his gaze drifting across the canyon. "Because this isn't about revenge, Emily. It's about upholding the law, even when it's been warped and stained. It's about proving that there's a better path." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting a weariness that transcended physical exhaustion. "It's about striving to be the man I should have been a long time ago." The deputies, having subdued Callahan, awaited Daniel's commands. Silence hung in the quote. Brrr, broken only by the lonely cry of a hawk circling far above. "Take him to the nearest federal facility," Daniel instructed, "and ensure he receives a legitimate trial." He met the gaze of the men who, moments before, had been prepared to kill him. That's what sets us apart from the Barlows and the Callahans of this world. We believe in justice, not vengeance. As they escorted Callahan away, Emily rested a hand on Daniel's arm. What is that? About the Barlows? They won't just vanish. Daniel met her gaze, a spark of something akin to hope igniting within him. Then we'll be ready for them. We'll bring them down, Emily, together. But this time, we'll do it by the book. He paused, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Besides, I still have a bone to pick with that viper. He understood the challenges ahead would be arduous and fraught with peril. But as he looked at Emily, standing strong and determined beside him, he felt a surge of renewed resolve. This was no longer simply about protecting a weakness. It was about reclaiming his own integrity, about fighting for what was right, even in a world that seemed to have forsaken its meaning. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was about forging a future he had long believed was beyond his reach. Betrayal unmasked the silence that had descended after Callahan's capture, was as thin as spun glass, and just as easily shattered. A gunshot tore it apart. Leads screamed through the canyon, caromming off stone and puffing up gritty clouds. Callahan's crew, coiled among the rocks like desert adders, had begun their desperate gamble. Daniel yanked Emily behind a wagon, its planks a flimsy shield. "Keep your head down," he snapped, already leveling his revolver. The peacemaker, an extension of his very being, barked in reply. Each shot a measured response to the pandemonium. Years of hard-won experience, etched onto his lined face and ingrained in his toughened hands, guided his aim. Emily, however, refused to remain a passive observer. She peered around the wagon's wooden wheel, eyes sharp, assessing the situation with a composure that belied the danger. "They're outflanking us on the east," she yelled over the din, indicating a cluster of razor-edged rocks. Her voice, though tight with adrenaline, resonated with an unexpected authority that surprised even Daniel. "Damn it, Emily, stay put!" he bellowed, but she was already in motion, snatching a rifle from the wagon bed. In her eyes, he glimpsed raw resolve, a staunch refusal to be helpless. Even as worry gnawed at him, he couldn't stifle a surge of admiration. The air thrummed with the sting of gunpowder and the high-pitched whine of passing bullets as the fight intensified. Daniel moved with fluid efficiency, dodging from cover to cover, his motions precise and lethal. Two of Callahan's men crumpled against the unforgiving rock, but more kept pouring in, their numbers seemingly inexhaustible. Emily, surprisingly skilled with the rifle, held her own. One of the flanking attackers fell victim to her steady aim. Daniel watched, impressed, as she reloaded with a swiftness that defied her lack of practice. She was a natural, born to survive. Just as a glimmer of hope appeared, a new sound cut through the chaos, the unmistakable whinny of horses and the deep rumble of a stagecoach. Sheriff Jedediah Thompson, righteous fury etched on his face, stormed into the canyon, a posse of deputies trailing behind. "Cease fire," Thompson roared, the sound reverberating off the canyon walls. "What in God's name is going on here?" Daniel warily lowered his weapon, his gaze narrowed and distrustful. Thompson's arrival felt suspiciously convenient, timed too perfectly. He dismounted, his gaze raking over the carnage. His eyes snagged on Callahan, securely restrained by one of Daniel's men. Something flickered across Thompson's face recognition, perhaps. "Before vanishing entirely, Marshal Gray," Thompson drawled, his voice oozing false concern. "What accounts for this bloodshed?" "Callahan's men initiated a rescue attempt," Daniel stated, his tone devoid of emotion. "We were acting in self-defense." Thompson shook his head, feigning disapproval. "This is a damned mess, Marshal. A genuine fiasco. And you appear to have exacerbated it by involving that woman." His attention shifted to Emily, standing defiantly beside the wagon, rifle still in hand. "Emily Porter," Thompson's voice hardened. "You are wanted for questioning in connection with the Barlow gang. You are under arrest." Daniel stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving towards his revolver. "She's under my protection, Sheriff. She's a material witness." "A witness?" Thompson scoffed. "Or an accomplice? We have credible information that she has been misleading you, Marshal, sending you on a fool's errand." Emily's eyes sparked with indignation. "That's a lie. I'm here to testify against Barlow, to tell the truth about his crimes." Thompson ignored her outburst, his gaze locked on Daniel. "I am instructing you to release her, Marshal. Surrender her to my custody, and we can resolve this matter back in town." Daniel hesitated, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Something was deeply amiss. Thompson's manner, his accusations, his evasiveness all suggested a hidden agenda. He glanced at Emily, her face a canvas of fear and apprehension. He knew, with sudden clarity, that Thompson was not to be trusted. "I cannot comply with that request, Sheriff," Daniel stated firmly. "She remains my responsibility." Thompson's features contorted into a mask of rage. "You are making a grave error, Marshal," he spat. He drew his own revolver with practiced ease. The barrel was leveled not at Daniel, but at Emily. "She knows entirely too much," Thompson hissed, his eyes gleaming with malevolence. "And she will be silenced." The atmosphere crackled with impending violence. The adrenaline surged through Daniel, sharpening his senses. With chilling certainty, he understood that he faced not merely a corrupt lawman, but a man willing to murder to safeguard his secrets. The betrayal was complete, and the lines were drawn. Justice and the law had become tragically divorced. Redemption's reckoning the cold steel of the manacles chafed Emily's skin, a biting reminder of Sheriff Thompson's betrayal. Daniel remained rooted, the badge in his pocket a leaden burden, alongside the grim task ahead. Thompson's grin was a slick, oily thing, oozing triumph. "Well, Marshal? Spectating justice, or impeding an officer?" Emily's gaze, locked with Daniel's, radiated not fear, but a raw, untamed resolve that mirrored the surrounding wilderness. He read a silent appeal, not for rescue, but for faith. He had a choice to make. "Sheriff." Daniel's voice emerged rough, like swallowing gravel. He edged forward, angling toward Emily, not Thompson. "With all due respect, I think you're on shaky ground." The smirk widened into a leer. "Shaky? I possess a valid warrant. Obstruction? Assault, the list goes on and on. Those charges smell rotten." Daniel countered, his hand inching towards his weapon. Unease rippled through the other deputies, their eyes flitting between Daniel and their superior. The air thrummed with unspoken challenge. Then Emily moved. It happened in a blur, catching Daniel off guard. A sliver of metal materialized in her hand, drawn from a concealed sheath beneath her skirt, a last-ditch defense against a world that had given her little. With a swift, economical movement, she sawed at the handcuff chain. The substandard metal gave way with a sharp crack. Thompson bellowed, surging forward. But Emily was quicker. Pivoting, she used her momentum to flick the small blade upward, connecting with the sheriff's wrist. He howled, his revolver clattering to the dirt. The knife followed, landing with a soft thud. "You maniac!" Thompson shrieked, cradling his wounded wrist. The deputies reacted instantly, hands flying to their sidearms. But a palpable confusion clouded their expressions. They sought direction from Thompson, then from Emily, Then to Daniel. "He's in Barlow's pocket." Emily's voice rang out, clear and forceful, cutting through the burgeoning pandemonium. "He's been shielding them for years. That warrant is a fabrication." Daniel advanced, his pistol now drawn and aimed squarely at Thompson. "Tell them, Sheriff. Tell them about the kickbacks, the deals you cut with the devil himself." Thompson's face contorted with fury and desperation. "Don't listen to her. She's a liar. She's trying to incite a mutiny." One of the deputies, a fresh-faced kid with hesitant eyes, finally spoke. "Sheriff, what's happening? Is what she's saying the truth?" Thompson's silence hung heavy as an admission. He scanned their faces, seeking loyalty, finding only suspicion and doubt reflected back. The scales had tipped. "I found something in Caleb's ledger," Daniel revealed, his gaze unwavering. "A coded message. Took some time to break it, but it led straight to you, Sheriff, to your arrangements." He saw the flicker of recognition in Thompson's eyes, the dawning realization that his carefully spun web was unraveling thread by thread. "Arrest him," Daniel commanded, his tone brooking no argument. "Arrest him for corruption, conspiracy, and impeding justice." The young deputy, joined by another, cautiously approached Thompson, weapons still trained on him. "Sheriff, hands where we can see them. You're under arrest," Thompson sputtered, his face turning a shade of mottled plum. "You can't do this. I am the sheriff." "Not anymore," Daniel stated flatly. As the deputies wrestled Thompson into restraints, Callahan, who had been lurking in the shadows, made a break for it. He sprinted towards the horses, hoping to vanish into the sprawling expanse of the plains. "After him," Daniel yelled, and two deputies peeled off in pursuit. The chase was brief. Callahan, burdened by his avarice and cowardice, was no match for the deputies' youthful stamina. They brought him down hard, dragging him back, kicking and cursing, to answer for his misdeeds. The sun blazed down on redemption, casting stark shadows across the gritty main street. The air reeked of gunpowder and sweat. But a different tang lingered, too, the scent of justice, served late. Daniel watched as Thompson and Callahan were escorted away, their vile reign finally concluded. A profound weariness settled upon him, a deep-seated exhaustion that went beyond the physical. The burden of his past, the specters of his failures, seemed to weigh heavier than before. Had he truly accomplished something worthwhile? Had he truly earned the mantle of lawman? He glanced at Emily, standing slightly apart, observing the unfolding scene with quiet intensity. Her clothes were ripped, her face smudged with grime, but her eyes still blazed with that fierce, unyielding fire. He approached her. "You all right?" he asked, his tone gentler. She nodded, meeting his gaze. "I am now." "Thank you," he said, the words feeling inadequate to the moment. "For everything." "We're not finished yet, Marshal," she replied, a ghost of a smile gracing her lips. "We still have to get to that courtroom." He knew she spoke the truth. The battle was far from over. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a spark of hope ignited within him. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could still find absolution in this final act. Maybe he could finally bury the past and forge a future worth defending. And maybe, just maybe, that future included Emily Porter. Testimony and truth, the courthouse bulked against the pearly sky of early dawn, a leviathan of sandstone. Miniature cyclones of grit swirled in the empty street, mirroring the inner storm raging within Daniel. Sleepless nights had carved deep trenches in his face, a stark chronicle of unrelenting pressure. Beside him, Emily appeared wan yet collected, her gaze riveted on the imposing structure. He covered her arm with his hand, the skin rough and reassuring. "Ready?" She returned his look, a fleeting shadow of fear quickly eclipsed by grim resolve. "As I'll ever be, Marshal." Their footfalls echoed in the vast entry hall, the only sound breaking the silence. The air tasted of stale paper and anxious perspiration, heavy with anticipation. Heads swiveled as they passed attorneys, journalists, onlookers, all drawn to witness the collapse of Callahan's dominion. Daniel's hand hovered near his sidearm, his senses keenly alert. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. The courtroom crackled with tension. Judge Mallory, his features permanently molded into a disapproving mask, sat like a granite statue on the bench. Callahan was already present, flanked by sharp-suited lawyers, his customary bravado replaced with strained composure. He locked eyes with Emily, his lip curling into a sneer. Daniel subtly adjusted his position, interposing himself. The prosecution commenced, unfurling the tapestry of evidence, revealing Callahan's cruelty and venality. But the true burden, Daniel understood, rested on Emily. When she took the stand, she moved with unwavering steps, chin lifted. Daniel watched, his heart swelling with a protectiveness he hadn't experienced in decades. The prosecutor led her gently, prompting recollections of the events leading to her escape from Callahan's grip. Emily's voice resonated through the hushed room, articulate and unwavering. She detailed the stolen herds, the intimidation tactics, the routine brutality that had become Callahan's signature. She recounted the night she witnessed the murder of a rancher who dared to resist. Callahan's lawyers lodged frequent objections, attempting to undermine her credibility, to brand her a vengeful liar. But Emily remained steadfast, her eyes unwavering. "He believes he's above the reach of the law," she declared, her voice tinged with steel. "But he can act with impunity. He's wrong." Then Callahan rose to cross-examine. His eyes blazed with contained fury. "You're fabricating this, Emily," he hissed, his voice laced with malice. "This is pure spite. This is about seeking justice," she countered, her voice ringing clear and true. "For everyone you've harmed, for those you murdered." Callahan invaded her personal space, his face mere inches from hers. "You'll lament this, Emily. You'll regret crossing me." Daniel's muscles coiled, his hand instinctively drifting toward his weapon. But Emily didn't recoil. She met his gaze, her eyes burning with defiance. "I'm not intimidated by you," she stated, her voice firm and unwavering. "Not anymore." Momentarily stunned, Callahan straightened, a flicker of doubt betraying him. He resumed his questioning, but his earlier self-assurance had vanished. He sensed the tide turning against him. Emily's testimony extended for hours, each word a blow against Callahan's carefully constructed image. Her quiet dignity and courage infused the courtroom. Daniel's admiration deepened with each passing moment. She was more than just a protected witness. She was a force to be reckoned with. When she finally descended from the stand, a low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jury retired, their faces somber. The agonizing wait began. Each tick of the clock stretched into an eternity. Daniel remained by Emily's side, offering unspoken support. Conversation was minimal, but their shared ordeal had forged an unbreakable bond, a silent empathy that transcended mere words. At last, the jury returned. Judge Mallory's voice boomed as he commanded order. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with a world-worn face, rose and delivered the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Jedediah Callahan, guilty as charged on all counts." A wave of sound crashed through the room. Callahan's features twisted with fury, his eyes darting about. Seeking any avenue of escape, his legal team appeared crestfallen. Judge Mallory's gavel slammed down. "Bailiff, take the defendant into custody." As Callahan was escorted away, he turned to glare at Emily, his eyes venomous. "This isn't finished," he spat. "You'll live to regret this." Daniel moved forward, his presence a silent wall. "It is finished, Callahan. You're going to prison to answer for your crimes." Emily placed a steadying hand on Daniel's arm, pulling him back. He met her gaze, a mingling of relief and gratitude shining within. Outside, the gathering had swelled. Reporters swarmed, their inquiries a cacophony of noise. Daniel shielded Emily, guiding her through the throng. He needed to extract her from the chaos, to find sanctuary where they could finally exhale. As they walked, Emily turned to him, her eyes glistening with tears held back. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." He squeezed her hand in return. "You did it, Emily. You were the beacon of courage strong enough to speak truth to power." At the edge of town, a horse and buggy stood waiting. Daniel assisted Emily into the carriage, then took his place beside her. He grasped the reins and nudged the horse forward, leaving the courthouse and the commotion receding behind them. As they journeyed, Daniel turned to Emily, her face illuminated by the fading sun's amber glow. He saw not just a witness, but a woman of exceptional fortitude and grace, a woman who had profoundly impacted him in ways he hadn't yet begun to understand. He gazed ahead, toward the open trail, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a spark of hope ignited within him. Perhaps this wasn't the final chapter. Maybe it marked the dawn of a new beginning. The road to redemption demanded a heavy toll, he knew. But witnessing the triumph of justice reflected in Emily's eyes, he found himself ready to pay it. A new horizon, the dust from the Callahan trial had begun to settle, a film-glazing redemption, mirroring the deep-seated fatigue that clung to Daniel Gray. He occupied the porch of his modest dwelling, a place he'd once dreamt of escaping, a place now imbued with a strange new significance. The porch groaned softly beneath him as he leaned back in the rocker, the sunset ablaze with vermilion and violet. High above, a solitary hawk traced lazy circles, a silent sentinel guarding its territory. He knew that instinct. He'd been a hunter himself, pursuing men deserving of punishment, but the chase had left its scars. His eyes dropped to the tarnished star pinned to his chest, the silver dulled by time and shadowed by memories. Retirement. The word had whispered promises of tranquility, a life dedicated to leisurely pursuits, far removed from violence and malfeasance. Yet now, it echoed with emptiness. Callahan's conviction hadn't simply been a triumph for Emily. It was a victory for redemption, for the enduring power of delayed, but ultimately realized, justice. And he'd played a part. He pictured Sheriff Barnes, stewing in a jail cell awaiting his day in court, a harsh reminder that the battles weren't always fought against desperados in the wilderness. Sometimes, the enemy wore authority. A floorboard protested behind him. He didn't need to turn. Emily's presence always preceded her, announced by the subtle fragrance of lavender that clung to her, a delicate aroma that hinted at hidden fortitude. "Beautiful sunset," she murmured, her voice gentle. "It is," he conceded, still captivated by the hawk's aerial dance. "Brings back Arizona sunsets. Thought I'd spend my days just watching 'em, nothing else on my plate." Emily joined him on the porch, leaning against a sturdy post. "And now?" Daniel sighed, running a hand across his sultaned pepper beard. Now I figure there's still hands to be played. Barnes wasn't the only rotten apple, and Callahan's viper nest still needs stamping out. He finally pivoted, meeting her eyes. I'm puttin' my retirement on hold, Emily. A flicker of surprise ignited her gaze. Really? He affirmed with a nod. This town, it needs a marshal it can depend on. And maybe, he added, a trace of a smile gracing his lips, maybe I need this town too. Emily gazed out at Redemption's main street, submerged in lengthening shadows. She'd arrived a frightened fugitive, desperately seeking sanctuary. Now, she stood defiant, a survivor, and so much more. She'd testified against Callahan, confronted her demons, and discovered something unexpected within herself. I was thinking, she ventured, her voice tinged with hesitancy, of maybe staying. Daniel's eyebrows lifted in surprised inquiry. Staying? She confirmed with a nod, her eyes locking with his. I know it's not exactly the height of civilization, but there's something about this place. The people, they're decent folk, deep down, despite all the hardship. And, she paused, drawing a steadying breath, I feel secure here, safer than I've felt in years. He scrutinized her face, searching for any trace of uncertainty. He encountered only candor, coupled with a vulnerability that resonated within him. Redemption ain't always sunshine and roses, he cautioned. There's still trouble brewing, always will be. I know, she responded, a slight smile curving her lips. But I'm not afraid of trouble anymore. Not if I have someone by my side. The ensuing silence hung heavy with unspoken emotion. The hawk had vanished, absorbed into the encroaching twilight. Crickets chirped in the adjacent fields, their chorus a constant backdrop against the simmering stillness. Daniel rose, his joints offering a familiar protest. He ambled toward Emily, halting a few feet from her. He gazed into her eyes, witnessing the reflection of the fading sun, the reflection of his own exhaustion, and something more, a nascent hope. Emily, he began, his voice raspy with emotion. You rode in looking for justice. You found it. But you stumbled onto something else too, something I didn't even realize I was searching for. She reached out, her fingertips lightly brushing his forearm. What's that, Daniel? He covered her hand with his own, his weathered fingers interlacing with hers. A reason to keep up the fight. A reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, a man can find grace too. Her eyes welled with tears, but she held his gaze. You've already found it, Daniel. You just can't see it. He squeezed her hand, a silent vow passing between them. The atmosphere crackled with unuttered sentiments, with the weight of their shared history, with the delicate possibility of a future forged together. I'm no spring chicken, Emily, he stated, his voice low and sincere. I've got more yesterdays than tomorrows. I'm not asking you to be, she countered, her voice equally subdued. I'm just asking you to be yourself, the man who stood up for me, the man who believes in what's right, the man who makes me feel protected. He drew her closer, his hand gently cradling her cheek. He registered the warmth of her skin, the subtle tremor in her touch. He hadn't felt this alive and he couldn't recall. And what about you, Emily? He inquired, his voice barely audible. What is it you truly desire? She lifted her gaze to meet his, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I want a haven, Daniel. A place where I truly belong. A place where I can finally establish roots. And I want you. He inclined his head, his lips grazing hers. It was a hesitant caress, a tender exploration, yet it pulsed with an emotional depth that overwhelmed him. It was a kiss of gratitude, of reverence, of affection. He drew back slightly, his eyes searching hers. Are you Emily, she affirmed with a nod, her gaze unwavering. I've never been more confident of anything in my life. He kissed her again, this time with greater assurance, with simmering passion. The passage of time seemed to dissolve, the weariness lessened, and momentarily he felt rejuvenated. He felt invigorated. As they stood entwined in the fading light, a fresh vista unfurled before them, a vista fraught with uncertainty, yet illuminated by hope. The toll of redemption might be considerable, but the reward was worth contending for. The legal system might be imperfect, society tainted, but authentic justice could still flourish in the spirits of those willing to embrace it, and in the adoration that blossomed in the most improbable of circumstances. Sunset serenade, the resignation lifted from Daniel like a long-held breath. For years he'd borne the stars' weight, the constant demand for unyielding authority, the soul-crushing load of snap decisions made under fire. Now, placing it on Mayor Johnson's desk, the burnished metal flashed in the afternoon light, felt akin to casting off an old constricting coat. So, it's done, Johnson observed, his voice a blend of relief tinged with disappointment. Are you certain, Daniel? Redemption needs men of your caliber. Daniel met the mayor's gaze, the crinkles around his eyes deepening as he offered a faint, genuine smile. Redemption requires something different now, Mr. Johnson. Renewal, not just rigid control. It needs faith, not simply enforcement. He exited the office with a surprising feeling of completion. The familiar groan of aged wooden planks, the musty aroma of paper and dust, receded as he stepped onto the sun-baked street. Emily stood waiting by the general store, her figure silhouetted against the vibrant tapestry of fabrics displayed in the window. She pivoted as he approached, her face an enigma. "Well?" she inquired, her tone gentle. "Did you go through with it?" "I did," he confirmed, the words possessing a tangible weight. No more badge, no more Marshal, just Daniel. A soft smile bloomed across her face, illuminating her eyes. "Just Daniel," she echoed, and for the first time, he discerned a future reflected there, a life that extended beyond mere survival, embracing true living. The following dawn, they departed redemption, no longer Marshal and witness, but something more profound, a connection unspoken yet undeniably present in the comfortable quietude between them. The town receded behind them, its familiar silhouettes dissolving into the vast expanse of the prairie. They weren't fleeing. They were venturing towards something, a promise carried on the breeze. Daniel had secured a small ranch 20 miles outside of town, cradled in a valley where a clear stream flowed and cottonwoods whispered secrets to the heavens. It wasn't opulent, merely a time-worn cabin, a ramshackle barn, and acres of wild land, but it was theirs. "It needs work," Emily remarked as they surveyed their new holding, her hand resting on the weathered wood of the porch railing. "Everything does," Daniel conceded, his gaze sweeping across the terrain, envisioning not dilapidation, but boundless possibilities. "But it's honest labor, and it belongs to us." He turned to her, the azure sky mirrored in his eyes. "What do you think? Can you picture us here?" She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the sun commenced its descent. Then she turned back to him, a determined glint in her eyes. "I can," she affirmed, her voice resolute. "I can see us building something together, something genuine." The initial weeks unfolded in a flurry of activity. They reinforced fences, patched the cabin roof, and cleared the overgrown fields. Daniel, channeling his years of law enforcement experience into practical tasks, discovered a profound satisfaction in manual labor. Emily, surprisingly resourceful, tackled each chore with fierce resolve. They worked in harmony, their movements becoming coordinated, a silent understanding blossoming between them. Evenings were spent by the flickering firelight, sharing stories, dreams, and moments of tranquil communion. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Daniel discovered Emily seated on the porch, contemplating the valley. He joined her, the silence stretching between them, comfortable and familiar. "I never imagined I'd find this," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Peace. A home." Daniel reached for her hand, his rough fingers interlacing with hers. "Neither did I," he confessed. "I believed my life consisted only of chasing shadows, bringing men to accountability. I didn't think there was room for this." She turned to him, her eyes gleaming in the fading light. "There's always room," she responded, her voice laced with emotion. "You just have to be willing to open your eyes." Days bled into weeks, then months. The ranch began to materialize, reflecting their shared vision. The barn was restored, the fields were cultivated, and the cabin transformed into a home, filled with warmth and laughter. They acquired a few horses, some chickens, and a devoted dog named Shadow, who trailed them faithfully, his tail wagging incessantly. Daniel taught Emily to ride, to shoot, and to endure in the wilderness. She, in turn, imparted patience, compassion, and the value of appreciating the simple joys of life. One afternoon, during their return from town, a familiar figure materialized on the horizon. It was Sheriff Brody, his face etched with concern. Daniel halted his horse, his hand instinctively reaching for the firearm that was no longer present. "What do you want, Brody?" he questioned, his voice steely. "Trouble's brewing, Daniel," Brody responded, his gaze flitting nervously. "The Barlow gang. They're not pleased with recent events. They're seeking retribution." Daniel's jaw clenched. "That's your concern, Brody. I'm done with it." "They're not solely after you," Brody disclosed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They're after her, too." He gestured toward Emily, who remained composed on her horse, her expression unwavering. An overwhelming wave of protectiveness washed over Daniel, more intense than any emotion he had previously experienced. He glanced at Emily, his eyes conveying his concern. "I warned you this life wouldn't be without its hardships," he said softly. "I know," she replied, her voice firm. "But it's worth defending." He turned back to Brody, his expression hardening. "Tell Barlow that if he seeks confrontation, he'll find it. And this time, I won't be bound by any star." As twilight descended, casting elongated shadows across the valley, Daniel and Emily mounted their horses. They rode slowly, side by side, toward the setting sun. The air carried the mingled scent of sagebrush and pine, accompanied by the melody of crickets chirping in the distance. They remained silent, their unspoken communication conveying a profound understanding and a shared determination. As the last sliver of the sun vanished below the horizon, igniting the sky in a spectacle of color, Daniel reached for Emily's hand. Their fingers intertwined, their grip strong and unwavering. They rode onward, into the darkness, toward a future uncertain, yet illuminated by hope, love, and the promise of a fresh beginning. The sunset served as their ballad, a vibrant symphony celebrating their enduring bond and their steadfast commitment to one another. It signified the culmination of one chapter and the commencement of another, a testament to the enduring power of love and hope to triumph even in the most challenging circumstances. They were riding into their life, together,